Everyone is losing their minds about these binoculars. These are easily the most requested piece of gear I've had for review on the channel over the last 6 months. Now I am holding in my hands the Sig Zulu 6 image stabilizing binos. And the question we're going to answer here today is, are these really the game-changing piece of gear that everybody is making these out to be? Now, before we dive into that, I got a little bit of a story time for everybody, because I really do feel like there's a shift going on in the industry right now, and I think it's in a positive direction. So I recently did a range-finding binocular review, and I included the Sig 10Ks and the Sig 3Ks. The Sig 3Ks are discontinued, and there's an updated version of the Sig 10Ks. And I will be honest with you, I ripped those binoculars apart pretty hard. The Sig 10Ks had an extremely strong blue tint to them, and there was several features of both those pairs of binoculars that I thought could use improvement. And to my surprise, after that review, Sig reached out and they wanted to hop on the phone and have a chat. And I hopped on a conversation with the brand manager for the electro-optics division, a guy named Troy Hellman. I got nothing but positive stuff to say about this guy. And he said, listen, you were right with some of the stuff you had to say about those, but in all fairness, you were looking at old gear. Neither of those devices are the up-to-date version of those devices. And we think if you're gonna look at Sig stuff, you should be looking at the most up-to-date Sig stuff. And they said, so let us know what you want. And I was just like, how refreshing is this? Like, that's all I'm asking from these companies is I want to give you guys a fair shake, and I want to look at the most up-to-date gear. The problem is, on a non-sponsored, unbiased channel, I got to pay out of pocket for all this stuff myself, and it's impossible, especially with optics, to just have every version of every newest item that's on the market. I just want to share that because I think sometimes like the big bad companies tend to get a bad rap, and they're not all just these big machines trying to whore out gear. I do think there's good people at some of these companies that really do believe in the gear and want to support, you know, the smaller channels and the more honest channels, as opposed to just sponsoring everybody under the sun for bullshit fake reviews that we know aren't reviews at all. They're just paid for infomercials, like on most other YouTube channels. Now, the other direct benefit to this relationship is that I now have access to somebody who actually knows all the technical details for all the products. So when I run into a stumbling block, I can actually go get a clarified answer, because this is the other frustration I run into all the time, especially with optics. They put very limited information in their marketing collateral, and they always have like a bit of a marketing skew on it. So when you're trying to find out the technical details of stuff, if you don't have a connection with somebody at the company and you just get a general customer service representative, they don't have that kind of information. So now to have somebody that I can text or call and say, listen, I've run into this issue, what's the actual technical? And we're gonna see in this review today, there's a couple of issues where if it hadn't have been for my ability to contact them, and I gotta say, they were unbelievably forthright with a lot of the information. I never felt like they were trying to skew things or paint stuff in a favorable light. Where they made compromises in the design of this product, he was honest about it. And I think that's all anybody wants. They don't want, you know, to be told this like myth that this is the perfect product and we did everything great, because that's just not the fact of the matter. There are no perfect products. People just want an honest representation of what actually went into the product. And if they had to cut corners somewhere for weight or price, that's an understandable decision. Just let us know where you decided to cut those corners and why, and how that might affect the overall performance of the product. And then we as consumers can decide if we want it. So the goal of the video today is to give you an idea of how my personal user experience was with image stabilized binos, and where I think image stabilizing binos fit in your own personal gear locker. Now, I've had these binos for 3 months. I got to give my buddy Leighton credit for this, Glass Half Full Outdoors on Instagram. He bought these, he lent them to me. I really appreciate that. I'm leaving on vacation in 2 days, so I gotta get these back in the mail to him before I leave town. I've had them on 2 hunts. I took them onto Vancouver Island for a coastal black bear hunt where I was actually in a boat a lot of the time, which is a very interesting use case for these particular binoculars. And then I was up north for a week bear hunt at Landers Primitive Outfitting, And again, driving around in a truck, lots of run and gun style hunting. And so another kind of perfect use case to put these through the paces. Now, before we get into the pros and cons of these binoculars, I want to do a little shout out for Mindful Reviews. So if you enjoy this kind of content, non-sponsored, unbiased, honest, highly technical and analytical, then I really think you would be served to join Mindful Reviews. So Mindful Reviews is an online community platform I built from scratch to develop a community of like-minded individuals who were interested in unbiased reviews, wanted help making purchasing decisions. My goal is not to make you buy more gear. My goal is to help you buy the right gear the first time around. I had to buy 2, 3, 4 backpacks before I found the one that fit perfectly. I had to go through 3 or 4 shelters before I got the one that really fit my style of hunting. If we can take those 3 or 4 iterations and get them down to 1 or 2 iterations, that's going to save you money. It's going to allow you to spend more time hunting. So mindful-reviews.com. There's monthly, annual, and lifetime memberships. And if you want to see more of this unsponsored content, that's the only way I generate revenue on the channel. I have no brand deals with any sponsors of any kind. And so I would greatly appreciate support. And I think you would find that there's a phenomenal community of like-minded individuals, that the forums are alive with action. I was just on there today. In fact, we just decided I'm going to add a new feature and I'm going to do weekly Zoom calls. So I'm actually going to host a live Zoom call for everybody on the platform. There's currently 350 members, and whoever wants to log into that Zoom call can log in. We're going to do live Q&As. People can bring up a hunt that they're about to leave on and get help, feedback, a critique on their pack lists. I've even had people exchanging like tips about different locations and units. We go over upcoming draws on there. It's really a one-stop shop for people who are deeply passionate about hunting and want to get help and information in order to become a better hunter. So mindful-reviews.com. So let's start off with the pros. So I want to talk about this boat hunt for a little bit, because when you're sitting in a boat and it was just a little Zodiac and you're kind of like bouncing all around, standard binoculars are almost one step away from useless. Like, you're kind of rocking so much, it's very hard, especially if you get things that are even over 300, 400, 500 yards away. It's very hard to get a clear image. And that was the first real hunt that I had these things on. I'm just going to be honest, they blew my mind. On these first gens, there's a little switch up here that just basically goes from off to on. And when I first held them up, they were in the off position. And it took me a second to realize they were off. And I'm like, oh, nice enough binos, but like, that's not really impressive. And then I flicked them to on and held them back up. And it takes a second and then they kind of lock in. And you are literally blown away. I will say unequivocally, for a non-tripod glassing experience, they blew my mind. The ability to get a clear image and detail without alpha glass was super surprising to me. And the analogy I like to say is this: you know, if you asked me to glass something and, you know, the amount of detail I was able to get, or finding stuff, you said like that's the most important thing. You got to find as much stuff as you can. You can either have, you know, a $3,000 pair of binoculars handheld or a $1,000 pair of binoculars on a tripod. As long as it wasn't like 15, 20 minutes after sunrise or before sunset, I'm going for the $1,000 pair of binos on the tripod all day. I really do believe stabilizing binoculars changes your viewing experience. And basically what you've done is you've been given a stabilized viewing experience without having to like lug around or be locked into a tripod-like scenario. So huge benefit. The stabilization is unreal. It feels a little wonky at first because it kind of shifts around on you. Once you look through them, you'll know what I mean. You tend to get like a little bit of vertigo, seasickness type of stuff. But then once you get used to it, it goes away right away. Now, the other pro that I want to get into this is the warranty. So this was something else that Troy just clarified for me today. They were in between 2 different warranty systems. And now for all their gear, they've switched over to the infinite guarantee. So it's much in line with Vortex and other such companies, where it does not matter what you do to these. The electronic components used to be warranted differently, I believe, than the rest of the components, and it had like a limited warranty on it. Now, the whole thing all the components are warranted for life, and that is straight from the horse's mouth. Now, the only exception on that is a 10-year warranty on the tritium-related components. Now, I believe those are components with like the visible radioactive coating. It was previously 5 years. They've now upped that to 10 years. And the new warranty is retroactive. So any electro-optic that you've ever bought from Sig, could have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, doesn't matter. They are all now covered under the infinite guarantee. So those are pretty big benefits. The image stabilizing, there is no competition right now in the hunting world for another, product that has image stabilization. And then to have that, to beef up that warranty, because even most of the other range finding binoculars that I reviewed, other than the Vortex Fury, all of them had kind of nitpicky warranties. None of them stood behind them like Sig is now standing behind these, except for the Vortex Furies. Obviously, there's going to be some cons. This is one of my videos. So what did I not like about these binoculars? The placement of the focus wheel is not my favorite thing in the world. My hand tends to rest like this, and I'm constantly having to move my finger up in order to adjust the focus wheel. Now, that's not a deal breaker. However, it doesn't snap focus extremely well. And by snap focus, I mean, how do I describe this? Because the longer I use different binoculars and the more binoculars I review, the more that I realize how easily you recognize when everything is perfectly in focus is actually one of the things that contributes most to the user experience of the binoculars. I think the Zeiss Victory SFL are the best example of this on the market. Like, when you move that focus knob, as soon as you hit sharp focus, there's like zero doubt. It's not like you go past a little bit and then come back a little bit and you search for that focus. As soon as you hit it, bang. Everything you're looking at is tack sharp, and you know without a shadow of a doubt that everything is within focus. Some optics, I think it has to do with the depth of field. If it has a very narrow depth of field, that means you could have a larger aperture, but it also means that less of your field of view is in focus at the same time, so it's not quite as apparent when you're locked into focus on your chosen viewing area. Needless to say, it was a little frustrating trying to snap to focus with the Sigs. I think that field of view is incredibly narrow, and I did find myself searching for focus quite a lot. Now, low light performance, not fantastic on these. So the Gen 2s have a 74% light transmission. The Gen 2s actually use the same glass and the same coatings that are in the Zulu 10s, which is like their flagship line. I've actually got the 15s, the 15 power binoculars in my gear room, and I'm going to be taking them on my goat hunt. And my early testing with those binoculars, I am quite pleased with the quality of the glass in the Zulu 10s for that price point. Now, to put that in perspective, the Swarovski NL Pures have 91% light transmission. So we're talking about a difference of 17% light transmission. This is significant. Now, I do want to make one note about light transmission, because some companies will complain about this, because you can kind of play some games. You can choose which waves you actually want to detect and which ones you're going to focus on. And I don't want you to think that light transmission is like the be-all and end-all of the quality of glass or coatings in a binocular, but it's one data point that we want to look at. Also, even in the Gen 2s, there is a prism glare. So kind of the best prism you can use in a binocular is an Abbey Kronig. Lots of binoculars, including these ones, use a Schmidt Pishan. Now, there are some drawbacks to that, but due to the quality of the glass and the coatings that they've used, and this is even in the Gen 2s, there is still a slight glare towards the edges of the prism, which does introduce some kind of anomalies into the viewing experience. And so I will say that one of the drawbacks is that kind of like reduced glass quality, reduced light transmission, and some artifacting from that glare on the prism. Now, the final drawback, and for me, this is the most important one, is field of view. The typical industry standard way to communicate field of view is the amount of feet viewable at 1,000 yards. So basically, if you were to glass something 1,000 yards away, the distance from the left to the right perimeter of your viewing experience, however many feet that was, it would be feet at 1,000 yards. So with the Gen 2s, which are available in 12 power and 16 power with a 42 mil objective, the field of view is only 208 feet. Now, to put this in perspective, the Swaro SLCs, which are a 15 power binocular, have a field of view that's 234 feet. So not only is the field of view significantly reduced from like a similarly powered binocular, the field of view is also the same at 12 power as it is at 16 power. Now, I want you to think about this for a second because that doesn't make very much sense. Typically, the lower you go in magnification power, the greater you go in field of view, because you can only fit so much information within your field of view. So if you zoom in, it tends to shrink your field of view. And as you zoom out, it tends to widen your field of view. I just want you to think about looking through a spotting scope. When you're looking through that spotting scope, when you zoom in, the tunnel narrows. When you zoom out, the tunnel widens again. So the fact that there is a similar field of view between the 12 power and the 16 power is very confusing to me because it doesn't make any sense. And in fact, when I was looking at buying a pair of these just recently, I thought to myself, because some of the things I don't like about the 16, which is what I have, the 16s, I was like, well, maybe that's fixed on the 12s because they would have a greater field of view. Also, if the field of view is the same, why would anyone want the 12s? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you are literally just looking at a smaller picture. Because you're going to be, if the field of view is the exact same, 208 feet at 1,000 yards, you are going to see the exact same picture. You're either going to see that picture bigger and closer or smaller and far away. So I asked them about that. They said, without divulging too much technical information about how the electro-gyro mechanism works and the way they're able to stabilize the image, they can't really get into that. Suffice it to say, that was my main user experience problem with these binos. Walking around with your chest rig only having a 208 foot field of view at 1,000 yards is extremely debilitating. If you've ever tried to use the SLC 15s, for example, from your primary binocular, they make a terrible primary binocular because you lift them up and you're literally looking at, like, if you're looking at something, less than 200 yards away, you get such a small sight picture that it makes glassing very impractical because you can't see very much at any one time. It also makes finding things very difficult. Like, I was using these on the island. We did some cut block hunting one day. There was a couple bears off in this cut block, let's say 120 yards away. I kept lifting my binos up to see if I could get the bears in the screen, but I would lift them up and I would lose perspective about what I was actually looking at. And I'd have to put them down and I'd be like, okay, well, there's a big tree with a deadfall snag and then the bears are to the right. So I'd have to lift the binos up, find the big tree, go down to the snag, and then go down to the bear. Because the field of view was so small that I couldn't just scan the cut block for the bears. It was like everything was like super close and I was looking at like one tree or one stump. And to have them be your on-chest option, it just didn't seem very practical because that field of view was far too reduced to be highly practical. There are some benefits and some drawbacks. Now let's get into my thoughts about where these sit in your gear locker and do they replace, the standard 10x42s that most people are currently carrying on the chest. The simple answer, in my opinion, is no, not yet. But there's a caveat to that. First, my justification for that is low light performance and field of view. I just don't think these have come far enough yet where I would be willing to sacrifice, my NL Pures, for example, for the low light performance and the increased field of view. Now, I'll get into this a little bit later. Obviously, those are two completely different binoculars in completely different price performances. But I think you could even say something like the Victory SFLs, which are much closer to this. I would still rather be walking around on most of my hunts with a 10 power SFL on my chest than these. And let me talk about why. So one of the ways humans are wired to view things or to be able to find things is by detecting movement. So one of the most successful ways to glass, and this is going to make sense once you think about it, is to pick a field of view, hold your binoculars steady, and kind of just let your eyes float around. And then you notice like a little flick of something, or you'll notice a little shift or a little color movement. And then it draws your attention to that area and you realize, oh, I saw the flick of an ear, or I saw the rump of a sheep, or I saw something moving across the landscape or going behind a stump and then coming back out again. The greater field of view we have, statistically speaking, the more likely we are to see movement because the more area we're looking at a given moment in time. Like if you cut a field of view in half under the exact same situation, you're half as likely to detect movement simply because you're looking at half the size of an area at any given point in time. That being said, if we're not talking about a sitting and glassing situation, we're talking about a run and gun situation, these things crush. Like, you could not have paid me to take my NL Pures on that Zodiac-based black bear hunt on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It would have been impossible to use anything else. These things were phenomenal. They were the perfect binocular for that particular use case. Now to look at the flip side of that coin, where would you typically take a high-powered binocular? You would typically take a high-powered binocular into a situation where you're gonna have a tripod. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when I bring my 15s, when I bring my 12s, I typically have a tripod to put them on. Now, if you're gonna put glass on a tripod, it nullifies the benefits of the image stabilization. Like I wish these guys had have offered a 10, and they have a 10, but it's like a 10 by 30 or a 10 by 32, which is not big enough. If these guys had a 10 by 42 with a wider field of view, like getting upwards of 300 feet or something competitive around what a typical 10 power binocular would be, that to me, then they would start to have an argument for like the ultimate replacement binocular, because you could still use it in that tight timber. Like where I hunt blacktail, for example, there's no way I could use these. I need an 8 or a 10. I need to be able to lift up my binocular. I'm looking like 50, 75 yards in front of me, and I'm trying to pick up little movement behind trees, and I need as wide of a field of view as possible. It would be like trying to use the scope on your rifle while blacktail hunting at 12x. Like you're gonna lift it up and you're never gonna find the deer. You need to have that thing cranked all the way down to 3 or 4 so that when you lift that rifle scope up, you've got a big wide sight picture and you can acquire that target as quickly as possible. So if you're up in the high country and you're glassing all day and you have a tripod, it kind of nullifies the benefit of the image stabilization. Here's the thing, for those long glassing, like I'm talking sheep hunt, I'm talking trophy mule deer hunt, I'm talking goat hunt, where you're literally getting up into the high country and glassing for 8 to 10 hours a day, you're gonna bring a tripod even if you have these. For 2 reasons. One, there's no way you're ever gonna sit and glass effectively for 10 hours hand-holding binoculars. Your arms are just gonna get too sore. Number 2, if you wanna grid effectively, in my opinion, you need a tripod to be able to kind of lock in and like lock the tilt, pan all the way across, come down a couple degrees, pan all the way across. You can't do that with your hands. Like you forget where you are, you go to take a break, you grab a drink, oh shit, where was I now? You lift them back up. It's like, oh, did I get that part? I don't really remember. Like it's a nightmare. And so also in those situations, that's where that low light performance really starts to shine. Like when you're in the high country, especially with mule deer, where like that first hour of the day is so critical, I do truly believe that in that case, the best product for you is still, alpha glass on a tripod. Now you're gonna lose the power of the image stabilization on your hike in and your hike out and any of those like little quick run and gun situations. But I think if the ultimate priority of the hunt is to spend a significant amount of time glassing every day and you're already gonna have a tripod, these are not the binoculars for you. Listen, I don't have a perfect answer for you because I will give you another devil's advocate play right now. What if you were elk hunting in Wyoming? No need for a tripod, probably not looking at stuff less than 100, 150 yards away. Like elk are big. If you're waiting for an elk to come into a calling situation, like if it's in archery, it's not like a blacktail where you're trying to like find it. You can see the elk. When you're typically glassing for elk, especially in archery season, You're just like, is that a legal bull? Should I go over there and chase it? Like you're looking across the valley to the other side. So you don't need to carry a tripod. Archery hunting, normally my bow is always in one hand. Holding these in one hand, the user experience is phenomenal. So if you were going on something like that, I think these would be the perfect binocular to take. So listen, I do like to kind of force myself to give you guys an answer because I found a lot of people who review these or talked about them, said they're great, but did they really tell you in their opinion what you should do? Like, should you ditch your old binoculars? Should you only have these binoculars? And I feel like I owe you a very firm answer on where I think these sit in your gear locker. So here's the deal. Currently, in their current iteration, if you are on a tight budget, I still think the best option, if you go on a variety of hunts, if you're going to do a high country mule deer hunt, and then you're also going to do like a whitetail hunt, that's the other thing. If you were sitting in a tree stand and you're going to be glassing whitetails coming in like you're really focused on finding a trophy buck, and you're going to be glassing stuff 50, 75 yards away, these are not a great option. You're already sitting still in a stand, glassing for whitetail. The image stabilization is really not that beneficial. And having that reduced field of view, it's going to take you a long time to acquire that target. I think you'd be better off with a pair of 8s or 10s. So listen, if you only have enough cash for one pair of binoculars, I still recommend a pair of 10s, some type of alpha. Save up for them. Get the best you can. Or if you're going NL Pures, because they have the increased field of view, I think you can get away with having a pair of 12s because they have the reduced perception of handshake. Now, the flip side of that coin, let's say you only go hunting once a year and you're doing something like an archery elk hunt in Wyoming, or you're not that type of guy. You don't have a lot of hunts in the year where you're going to be spending 10 hours a day glassing, or the super close stuff in deep timber is not ultimately important to you. If you're going to be spending a lot of time at boats, a lot of time in a vehicle too. Like I was in New Mexico, those guys glass from their truck constantly. The little vibration you get from a running truck makes it a nightmare to pick out details on the landscape. If you're going to be primarily glassing from a truck, primarily glassing from a boat, or doing mostly run and gun hunting like archery elk, then I say have at her. I think these would be the perfect pair of primary binoculars for you. Now, the third situation is the guy who's got a little bit of disposable income. Then I would say your primary binoculars should still be 10s or 12s, alpha glass, and then these are not crazy. Like I think they're $1,000 right now. It's not like these are a $3,000 or $4,000 pair of binocular. Like I think you can add these as a supplement to your gearbox. That's where I see them playing for me. There are hunts like the 2 bear hunts I just went on where I will totally take these because I think they're great. But when I go on my goat hunt in August, I'm not bringing these. I want alpha glass to sit on a tripod and help me pick apart every nook and cranny of what I'm looking at. So there you have it. My opinion, for what it's worth. Sig Sauer, thank you again for reaching out and looking at, building a relationship so that I can review more of your stuff on the channel. Super excited about that opportunity. If you could like, comment, share, or subscribe, I would greatly appreciate all the support. And as always, thank you for tuning in.